Hello again, folks. As promised, I can't stay off of YouTube, so here I am again. I'm smoking my little Peterson Tennessee Bull gave me. I really like this little pipe. I'm not a huge fan of bent, and this one is very much bent, but I like this one. I think the only reason I don't like bent pipes more than I do is because they can be sometimes a little bit of a pain to clean. At least for me. This one doesn't sometimes doesn't take a pipe cleaner all the way through down here. I haven't quite figured out the art of getting it to go through. I'm smoking the mythical Stonehenge flake. It's I don't know if you can see the rainbow coming. I've been wanting to try this for a while. Brian, Peg Leg Piper, included some of it in his little gift to me. We did a trade. I have to say, I can taste the Lakeland essence in this more than I can the Aaron Moore flake so far. It's not unpleasant at all. I don't mind it a bit. As you can tell, I can't stop smoking it long enough to talk. So I was gonna do a follow-up video about my giveaway, talk about some of the stuff that I found and some of the interesting things that came out of it. It's probably going to be a two-part video. So, as I said in my giveaway drawing, I really appreciate everybody participating, but I really appreciate some of the work that went into your videos. Some of them were just, I mean, you could tell they had thought about it for a long time. Merciful Anvery's video was like 30 minutes long or something like that, and he talked about, you know, why he chose this person and why he didn't choose that person. You can tell he put a lot of thought into that. I mean, a lot. I know that because I've sat down and done this exercise numerous times. As a matter of fact, for this, I sat down and tried to go, okay, they're doing theirs, who would be mine? I came up with 7 different combinations. And out of those 7, I don't think I used the same person twice. In fact, I know I didn't. And what makes it even more difficult, or made it more even difficult for me to pick, you know, who got the bonus entry into that, with the 7 that I've come up with, I can't pick which one of those is my favorite, not by a long shot. And I'm sure everybody felt like theirs was the best one because you put it together, man, and you put the thought, the effort into it. And literally, I mean, it was quite difficult. I watched every single video at least twice, every one of them, and I watched several of them 3 times. So this has been an absolute joy for me to do this. Somebody else that put a lot of, I'm not saying you didn't put a lot of thought into it, but somebody else that did was Metalhead Cigar Guy. And you could tell he's done it before and thought a lot about it. He put together 2 bands, a dead band and a live band. I only counted one of them in deciding who to choose. But there were some great bands. I mean, just for example, some of them that really like grabbed my attention. Sue Dunhill. You guys are probably lucky that she didn't want to be entered into the contest, because her band is just killer. Keith Emerson on keyboards, killer keyboard player. Also songwriter. Adrian Belew on bass. A lot of people might not even know who he is, but man, what stellar bass work. King Crimson. Frank Zappa on guitar. Frank Zappa and Adrian Belew together. And then I had Keith Emerson into that. And then Keith Moon on drums. And Grace Slick as the vocalist of that band. That would be fantastic. Tim, who won the penny guessing contest, did one kind of unlike anybody else. He was going for like an acid jazz kind of combo, which is kind of Zappa-esque, and his combo came out with Frank Zappa and then Paul McCartney on bass. Paul McCartney's very underrated as a bass player, I think, as highly regarded as he is. And then he's got Rick Wakeman from Yes. Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson are probably the top 2 older rock keyboardists that you could come up with. There's a few other newer guys out there that can play some killer stuff, but those guys set the standard. And then he's also got Buddy Rich on drums, the jazz drummer. There is no other one to consider, really. Oh, there's some great jazz drummers out there, don't get me wrong, but Buddy Rich, I mean. And then he threw in John Coltrane on saxophone. And he used a word I've never heard. I've always heard it. I mean, this is a locational pronunciation thing. I've always pronounced it saxophonist. He said saxophonist, and that word is good. I don't know, when he said that, it was just like that was the coolest word I'd ever heard. But that band would be a series, I think, of them playing live. It would be a series of some of the most searing solo work. And the reason that one, I didn't pick that one, is because in order for the people to shine as soloists, the other ones kind of have to lay back. And there's nobody in that band that likes to lay back. Especially Frank Zappa. He's the ultimate alpha male in a band. Nonetheless, it would be a joy to watch those guys play together. Metalhead Guitar Guy had Rob Halford, the metal god, on vocalist. And then every one of these guys are just standard bearers for what they do. Tony Iommi, I call him the riff master. Laying down metal riffs like nobody ever before or since. Pretty much invented heavy metal to me. John Petrucci from Dream Theater, one of my favorite guitarists of all times. If you're not into Dream Theater, if you haven't listened to them, if you're not into progressive rock, it might be a little odd to listen to for you, but man, dude can kill it. Steve Harris on bass. Neil Peart on drums. I mean, he also said if there was a, special guest on the album, Rick Wakeman, that would be stellar. Another extremely interesting to me. This one was one of the three that I was down to and trying to decide who to put on there, was Babyface Huey. He had the incredible rhythm section of Neil Peart on drums. Neil Peart is actually how he pronounces it. Not Babyface Huey, but Neil Peart. Stanley Clarke on bass. He's also one of those players you've heard a lot, and you probably don't even know who his name is, what his name is. If I'm not mistaken, he was in a band that I really like. I believe it was Stanley Clarke, and if I get this wrong, I'm going to feel stupid. It was a band called Baby Animals. It was Stanley Clarke on bass, Stuart Copeland on drums, and a girl named Deborah Holland on vocals. And they had a bunch of guests playing with them and stuff, but they put out two really, really great albums. But anyway, you got Peart, Stanley Clarke, Joe Walsh on guitar, and then on vocals and other instruments, he's got Linda Ronstadt, whose voice I just adore, and Stevie Wonder. That would be a great combo. Terry the Artist, John Entwistle from The Who, John Bonham from Zeppelin, John Lord from Deep Purple, Slash on guitar, and Brian Johnson from AC/DC on vocals. Hard rock powerhouse band right there. I would pay just to hear John Entwistle and John Bonham play together. And John Lord, I mean, the three Johns there. What were some other ones that were up there that were super interesting to me? Crosby's Corner had a really interesting combination. This is very similar to a band that I came up with in the style, not necessarily the people. But these are all vocalists, except for one, that do duets well, that are, masters of their instrument, and this would be a great combination. Phil Collins on drums, Elton John on piano, David Gilmour on guitar, Ann Wilson on vocals. And the part of that kind of pushed me away from this one was Cliff Burton on bass. Nothing against Cliff Burton. I just don't think he would be able to adapt himself to the things that they would be playing. He's more aggressive. He could probably play anything, make me look stupid, but that's kind of what pushed that one off from me. But again, that was a finalist. I mean, it's a great band. You can see how hard of a time I had putting these together. So that's just a few of the ones. I won't read them all off. There was some really good stuff on here. Some of the things I found interesting. We had 30 people enter the contest. So you would think, 30 drummers, 30 bass players, whatnot. It didn't work out that way at all. There were more guitar players chosen than anything else. That's kind of a given because a lot of people picked two. There were 110 total people mentioned. That's an average of 3.3 per band. So there were a few doubles. 29 of them, as a matter of fact. 29 people got chosen multiple times. 13 of those got chosen 3 or more times, and 3 of them got chosen 4 or more times. I would put together a band of the most popular, but the way the numbers work out, there's no way to pick a most popular guitar player. But the drummers, the most popular were John Bonham and Neil Peart. And after that, Keith Moon. The guitar players that got picked 3 times were Slash, Randy Rhoads, Angus Young, Jimi Hendrix, and Eddie Van Halen. The only, not the only, there were 4 pure vocalists that got chosen as a vocalist more than once. That was Brian Johnson from AC/DC, Ronnie James Dio, Freddie Mercury, and the vocalist that got picked more than any other was Ann Wilson. She got chosen 3 times. Bass, there was no competition. Cliff Burton got chosen 6 times. The others that got chosen a lot were Paul McCartney, Steve Harris, John Entwistle, and Les Claypool. What else was going on? Oh, and keyboardist that got chosen most was Rick Wakeman. He got chosen 3 times. The band that had the most people chosen out of it was kind of surprising to me. Shouldn't be, but talking so much, I keep letting my pipe go out. Metallica. Metallica had Lars Ulrich, James Hetfield, Cliff Burton, Robert Trujillo, it's 4, and technically Dave Mustaine. The only person that didn't get picked, well, there's 2 people that didn't get picked. That would Kirk Hammett on guitar and Jason Newsted, their bass player for a while. Bands that were underrepresented in some way or another. Rolling Stones didn't have anybody picked, which is a little odd to me, but I didn't pick any of them for my band either. Leonard Skinner had no one picked. Who else? Zeppelin only had Bonham picked. Thought for sure somebody would pick Robert Plant. No one picked Dwayne Allman on guitar. That was a little odd to me. No one picked Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck. No one picked Eric Clapton for guitar. Joe Davis picked Eric Clapton as a vocalist, and I thought that was an outstanding pick because I've always said Eric Clapton is probably the most underrated vocalist out there. He's a killer singer. Two bass players that got picked only once kind of surprised me, and that was Christopher Squire from Yes and Flea. One bass player that showed up on that list that I thought was a fantastic choice was Glenn Matlock from Sex Pistols. You think, oh, Sid Vicious was the bassist for, well, Sid Vicious was a bassist for the Sex Pistols, but the one that you hear on all the recordings was Glenn Matlock. Sid was kind of a puppet. Cool puppet, or unusual puppet, I'll put it that way. Another vocalist that showed up that I thought was a great pick was Warren Zevon. I can't remember who picked him right off the top of my head, but that was a great choice. Nobody picked, this is kind of understandable because he was a very unique, might not fit in with anybody else's band, but Bon Scott from AC/DC. One of my favorite front men of all time. But I can imagine any, and this kind of went into play for me for picking a bunch of these. There were certain people, a lot of people on this list, that when they play, you immediately know who they are. And I thought in some of the combinations that it would be very difficult for that band to sound like anything but who that person is. They kind of, their sound kind of shapes the landscape of the band. Who else with some cool picks on here? Oh, how about Grandma Pollyanna? Parson Rick's band was cool. And he also picked our good friend Pipes and Music from bass player Renzi. I had to go look up Grandma Pollyanna. I researched for at least 2 hours trying to name that person, and there's just no information. I've considered trying to contact Disney to see if they could pull that out of the ether, but the process for contacting Disney is a pain in the butt. Believe me, I checked into it. Two drummers from the same band, Kazi Powell and Carl Palmer, both from Emerson, Lake and So that's some of the very interesting things that I found. One thing that I said at some point, one of my giveaways, and I didn't have a final tally on this, so I can't tell you what it was, but I can estimate it. There's an effect, a mathematical effect that happens when people try to guess numbers. And the theory was working, but I didn't have enough guesses to make it work the way it typically works. If I'd had, say, 100 guesses, it would have been very interesting. Anyway, the theory states that people can't determine what a number of things are in a jar as well, individually, as well as they can collectively. So what happens is you generally have as many people guessing above the number as you do below the number. And if you average all of them together, it's often very close to the number. And this guy did an experiment. His was candy in a jar, and I don't remember the number, so I'm making it up, but it was like, 400 or whatever it was. And he asked 160 people, and the closest one to it, there were 10 people that were within 20 of the actual number, whatever it was. Collectively, it was within one, it was a few decimal points away from the actual number. On this one, the last time I averaged them up, the average was over 4,000, it's like 4,200. And I think the average would have actually gone up a little bit because the last person guessed 5,180. So you guys broke math. Math no longer works. Pioneer spacecraft's going to veer out of control. Taxes are going to go crazy. Thanks a lot, people. Alright, so I'm 25 minutes into this. I'm going to come back and do a part 2 where I talk about some of my picks if you're interested in that. So stay tuned.